Hello and welcome to Ahead of the Curve, the podcast from Acadia, where we take time to get under the skin of the risk, margin and collateral industry, to dig deep and present topical perspectives and insights on this hugely important sector. Phase 5 is well underway. Phase 6 will be upon us soon. Regulations covering uncleared margin rules, or UMR, which began with Phase 1 way back in September 2016, have had a profound impact on the risk management and derivatives industry. Only the largest firms, with an average aggregate notional amount, or AANA, greater than $3 trillion, were covered by Phase 1. But Phase 6, which comes into play this September, promises to bring into scope firms with an AANA greater than just $8 billion. For those firms, now is the time, if they haven't already, to start conversations with established service providers who can help them meet their UMR requirements. And many service providers will themselves be partnering with cutting-edge technology providers to deliver solutions for their clients. In this episode of Ahead of the Curve, we're going to look at the importance of that relationship and explore the advantages of outsourcing UMR compliance. To do that, we'll bring together a respected service provider, BNP Paribas Securities Services, and an expert technology provider, Acadia. With that in mind, I'm delighted to be joined by David Radley, Director of Strategic Accounts at Acadia, and Julie Mostefai, Global Product Manager for Over-the-Counter and Collateral Services at BNP Paribas Securities Services, along with Pierre Mauchamp, the Valuation Specialist for Over-the-Counter Collateral Services, also from BNP Paribas Securities Services. David, Julie, Pierre, welcome to you all. It's great to have you all on the podcast, on the program. Julie, let me come to you first. Let's focus on the challenges your clients are facing. What are they, particularly in relation to Phase 5 and to Phase 6?
Thank you, John. I would say our Phase 5 and 6 clients are mainly asset owners, asset managers or insurance companies. And the top challenge for them is to jump on the bandwagon, as they are caught by the very last phases, contrary to their counterparties who are mainly from the sell side and consequently already onboarded in the previous phases. This is therefore very new for them, and they have to ramp up quickly to demonstrate full compliance, while this is becoming quite standard for the counterparties. First, this should be obvious, but this is important to bring it up, the need to determine whether they are in scope. This is indeed the firm's responsibility. To do so, they have to calculate their ANA. The calculation itself is rather simple. It consists in the consolidation of all the OTC derivative transactions at group level over a certain period. But the complexity comes with all the rules behind this calculation. For instance, the scope of instruments to be included, it is not always the same as the scope of instruments eligible to post initial margin. This can be surprising, but this is the case, for instance, of the FX forwards, which are not subject to IM requirements, but are to be included in the AA calculation. Also, the jurisdiction is a key criteria to take into consideration. An instrument may be included in the calculation for a certain jurisdiction, but not for another one. And the calculation period can differ also depending on the jurisdiction. Our clients are not always familiar with all these conditions, and they are looking for our guidance as a service provider. Another challenge, I would say, is the legal documentation, very burdensome and many times too much underestimated by our clients. During the onboarding phase of a client, we always feel the necessity to highlight the strong dependency on its counterparties with the negotiation of the IM collateral documents, commonly the CSA, the eligible collateral matrices, but also the custody tri-party documentation. Many of our clients, they tend to target a complete IM framework across all their counterparties. And finally, this is rarely possible due to the time required. And our clients and their counterparties do not have necessarily the same priorities when our client look to execute a CSA, for instance, on the regulatory date for 1st of September. Each counterparty may have higher priorities with other counterparties. And this can create a delay in the response and, of course, in the execution of the agreement. This is a real game changer for the last phases firms, as it allows them to concentrate their efforts on relationships exceeding 50 million, whilst delaying the implementation of those below the 50 million. And this can sometimes reduce drastically the number of the relationships, and this is always appreciated when our clients are out of time.
Thank you for that, Julia. And let's just build on that principle of prioritization. Pierre, I'm interested in your thoughts here. Could you give me insight in your role as an analyst to the prioritization?
Sure. We offer our client to help them to prioritize between counterparties by performing simulation on portfolios. The simulation, it allows not only to prioritize counterparties, but also to select a calculation methodology that may impact the IM amount. Let me come back on the two methodologies used by the market participant to calculate the initial margin. One is called the schedule and is described in the BCBS IO score document. The second one is the well-known SIM methodology for a standard initial margin methodology. You can also go to look at to read the methodology on it's possible to find it on the ISDA website. The ISDA SIM is the industry risk-based methodology that was developed by ISDA and adopted by most of all phase 1 to 4 market participants. But with phase 5 and 6, I could notice different types of portfolio compared to previous phases. First of all, they can be much smaller. Second of all, they can have much more directional positions or strategy. And while running simulation on those portfolio, I have seen that ISDA SIM was not always the most relevant methodology to use. So what does it mean? It means that simulation is something important to perform, and it's a part of the discussion while negotiating the CSA, for example, with the counterparties. Lastly, I would like also to raise a final challenge for phase 5 and 6. That they will have to deal with. It is the model governance on the mandatory backtesting for ISDA SIM. So even if in Europe the regulation is not yet definitive, as we are still waiting for the final RTS to be published, we already know that our client will have to run model validation exercise. We still don't know all the detailed requirements for those exercises, but we can already confirm that this exercise will be very time-consuming.
Pierre, thank you for that. And Julie as well for some fascinating and important detail there on the impact of phase 5 and 6. David, I want to bring you in here as well now. Talk to me about Acadia's role here and the services you provide that can help BNP Paribas Securities Services clients.
Thanks, John, of course. But first, if I may, I'd like to explain where this all started. It was way back in 2015 when Acadia introduced its first service to support UMR, and the service was called IM Exposure Manager. This service was designed in full partnership with the majority of the Phase 1 banks as well as Trioptima, allowing the calculation and full reconciliation of exposures prior to margining. The service went live on September 1st, 2016, and I'm proud to say supports close to 99% of all operational UMR agreements being processed today.
So that's a good number, David, 99%.
We push for 100, but we can but try. But mainly, this is a great example of the industry working together to build out a solution that ultimately can be used by anyone in the world. As we've heard from Julie and Pierre, as we've moved through the phases, we've seen client requirements change. And sadly, not everybody or every one, in fact, most don't, outside of phases 1 and 2, have an abundance of skilled resources to build out against SIM or grid, complete the backtesting needs, or monitor their thresholds while staying on top of the regulatory requirements that UMR brings. So with Acadia and BNP, us being so involved in UMR and working closely with clients and partners, we've been able to react to the changing needs of phase 5 and 6 and introduce new services that ultimately allow them to benefit from economies of scale so they have systems equal to the largest banks. And our offerings include the ability to take in trades, calculate SIM or grid or both, produce CRIF to calculate exposures, support reconciliation, run dynamic and static backtests, and of course, margin it electronically through to the counterparties. And this is all underpinned with the fact that those services I just mentioned, we have comprehensive documentation so clients don't have to go through that process of producing the documentation for regulatory approvals. And to date, through the phases 1 to 5, the majority of firms have come to us to use that documentation to support their approvals everywhere around the world.
I just want to expand this a little bit more then, and thank you for that, David. What are the benefits of having a partnership with Acadia? Julie, let me come to you first on that.
First, I think it is important to remind we have a long standing relationship with Acadia. We were among the very first asset servicers to be onboarded back to 2012, if I remember well. At that time, the margin calls were all agreed via emails or even faxes, Stone Age now. And for us, as a collateral service provider, it makes sense to partner with Acadia to propose a full automation and get rid of this overwhelming manual process.
And I'm pleased to say that we've been working with BNP Securities Services for 10 years. And over that time, we've built a close working relationship and understanding of each other that is essential when new requirements are added or changed. As we've already mentioned, the introduction of UMR requires new ways of operating and new technologies and services to support. And this can be expensive, especially if you're not required to move margin immediately. And to put this into context, phase 5 was expected to have around 600 plus firms in scope. The actual number was closer to 350. And of this, and 7 months in now, only around 150 of those are moving margin. In phase 6, the numbers are expected to be around 700 firms caught, and based on our discussions, it will be around 150 to 200 firms that will move margin in the first 6 months, which leaves a large population in scope but operating under the threshold for some time. So, by working closely together, we have a complete suite of services that manages the transition and limits the cost, as they only need to adopt what's required. For those firms that are planning to operate under the threshold, our threshold monitoring service takes in exposure calculations from the brokers so that each firm has a clear view on where they are against their agreed threshold amount. Added to this service are triggers that alert you when you have breached the preset amounts, so you're always aware of where you are and can plan accordingly. Add to this part of the service, we have pre-trade calculation, which allows you to place trades with the correct counterparty, limiting your IM exposure and in some cases reducing it, which will lead to delay in any breaches of threshold. But inevitably, as firms move closer to the threshold, this is where this partnership really delivers by making transition simple and clear. Acadia, with its technology and ability to calculate SIM, grid, reconcile positions, margin, backtest, and BNP Securities Services, skilled resources and procedures to handle every step of the process around the requirements. And it's this combination of technology, people, and understanding that makes UMR less daunting than it could be.
Indeed. Well said, David. This is indeed the feeling for UMR, and especially for the IM. When we talk about initial margin and our partnership with Acadia, we have to speak about our threshold monitoring service. As said earlier, the regulatory threshold led to a shift of service for phase 5 and 6 firms. And IAM threshold monitoring became a key component of our IAM services. This is why we had designed a threshold monitoring service via our operating system for clients who had already outsourced the variation margin in BNP Paribas Securities Services, and consequently for which we do have all their OTC derivative transactions and all the data already set up. But we could also complement our offering with the Acadia IMTM module, especially dedicated to new clients we were onboarding for the Reg IM, and for which we did not have neither the transactions nor the data set up in our operating system. This way, we could meet expectations from either our existing clients. Having two different options of threshold monitoring in our IAM offering is also a very good modular solution for the clients who are fully conscious they will not breach the threshold before a long term, and therefore are comfortable with the monitoring relying on their counterparties calculation. This is what IMTM, the module of Acadia, provides. And then, as soon as they are closer to the threshold but not yet in breach, they can move towards our monitoring with a benchmarking of calculation versus their counterparties and also a daily reconciliation we perform.
Pierre, let me just bring you in here as well. What are your thoughts?
From a day-to-day perspective, the benefit of the partnership with Acadia is that almost all counterparties are connected to the initial margin modules. 99% or more. So this allows to benchmark the IM calculation and also to dig into the discrepancies in the case of a dispute on an initial margin call. For our analysts, the tool is more than a reconciliation engine that compare trade population we are used to see. It's possible to navigate easily in the portfolio and in all IM calculation details. For the SIM, we can navigate in the IM tree and compare with counterparties details. We can also look at the trade sensitivities in the case the counterparty permits it. So you can really have all the details of the trades. And thanks to this, we have solved pretty quickly several disputes. For example, I have easily detected that a counterparty which was calculating a portfolio under grid instead of SIM, because you've got this information available in the Acadia Exposure Manager. It's also possible to find very tricky mistake on the risk FX risk identifier that has been wrongly allocated by one of the party when you are calculating SIM. So we are really saving time, and it allows to provide a better service to all our clients.
Pierre, thank you for that. Julia, I just want to come back to you briefly. You mentioned a little earlier, and you've been talking about Reg IM. BNP Paribas, are you still accepting clients to onboard for Reg IM?
Well, this is becoming very late, I would say. But this is true. We have received some very late requests from some of our existing custody clients, for instance. And of course, although the deadline is largely over, I would say, because this is becoming now very urgent to implement the whole framework to exchange IM. We don't want to close the door, and we propose to take advantage of the regulatory relief of the 50 million, for instance. They are not always familiar with, and we can support them indeed at first with our threshold monitoring service, and then ensure a ramp up by onboarding progressively the counterparties identified as breaching quickly the threshold. We are proud to offer a best-of-breed solution for our clients, as we not only offer the IM calculation and exposure management, but also the IM segregation via our tri-party services. So this is something we are proud of because we can have a full end-to-end solution for our clients.
And I completely agree with you, Julie. From an Acadia perspective, time is running out. Where are we now? We're the day before Easter begins and we break up. And we've been working with clients to say time is of essence, but largely a lot of organizations have been well organized. So we're anticipating the last shout for coming into us to do the sensitivity calculation and all the way through the end of April. That said, we're not closing the door, but as we move through May and into June, it will be on our best endeavors, and that threshold monitoring service will become essential just to give firms that additional time frame that they require. So I believe by the combination of services that we've got, we can give additional time, but really, if you're not ready yet, the big advice is please reach out, right? Because time is against you.
Okay, so I'm going to keep this clock metaphor going because the clock is ticking. And as we look ahead, what should phase 6 firms be doing now to prepare for UMR compliance? Julie, let me come to you first on that.
I would say the first thing that the in-scope firms should definitely be aware if they are in scope or not. And they should have defined their prioritizations in terms of relationships. So just to define which are to be live as of September the 1st, due to the requirement of posting IM, and which will be under the threshold monitoring. For the ones who would be live, I guess that they are negotiating their CSA. Hope so, because they have to be in the middle of this huge task, and also agree with their counterparties on the calculation method. This is sometimes a long process of negotiation between the parties because each party can be more interesting in one calculation method rather than the other one. So this is part of the negotiation between SIM versus grid. And for those who will have to post initial margin as of September the 1st, of course, they would need to select their custodian. So I guess this is something they already have in mind and they have already made their choice, hopefully.
And on top of that, I would say take the opportunity to test so you know how this is all going to work and what issues you're going to need to manage. Your brokers are there and ready to support you now, but that time window is closing.
So remember, the trade in scope are the one done from September 1st. So it means that if you want to perform simulation, you have to think about the ramp up of trade that you will have from September 1st. You will have to think about the portfolio dynamic.
So I guess it's clear one message coming through here that the time is of the essence when it comes to all of this. Unfortunately, though, we are out of time for this particular podcast. So for David Radley, Julie Mostefai, and Pierre Mauchamp, thank you all very much for joining us. It's been a fascinating and really interesting conversation. And thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. We'd like to know what you think, so please do get in touch and share your thoughts. And you can find out more about Acadia by going to acadia.inc. But until next time, it's goodbye from us.